Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to put on our architect hats and take a close look at the blueprints behind scientific discovery.
So, what is the blueprint behind a scientific discovery? Just like a skyscraper needs a solid plan to stand up, every single research finding out there relies on its methodology. That's the structured process that makes sure a study is sound, repeatable, and, actually trustworthy. Right. Methodology is basically that hidden architecture that gives research all its strength. So, what we've done is we've dug into a whole bunch of recent studies to see how knowledge is actually being built today. All right, let's get into it.
Okay, first up, we're looking at what is, without a doubt, one of the most common blueprints you'll find, especially in social sciences. This whole approach is about getting to the why behind what people do, using really structured data from surveys and some pretty powerful statistical models. This four-step workflow is a total classic. First, you build your survey. Then you get your data, and after that comes this statistical one-two punch. The first hit is something called confirmatory factor analysis, or CFA. Think of it like a quality check. It makes sure your questions are actually measuring what you think they are. Then you bring in the main event, structural equation modeling, or SEM. That's what tests your big theory about how everything is connected. And honestly, we saw this exact process used for everything from e-learning to branding in the metaverse. And what's really wild here is just how flexible this blueprint is. I mean, you see it used to survey almost 700 students about motivation, then turn around and pull a different group about virtual branding, and then do a field survey on word of mouth. The topics couldn't be more different, but that core architecture, survey and SEM, it's exactly the same. That just goes to show you how powerful it is for testing a theory. So while this blueprint is awesome for testing a pre-planned theory, there are definitely trade-offs, right? A lot of the time it relies on, convenient samples like students, and it's just a snapshot in time. So you have to be a little careful about saying the findings apply to everyone, everywhere, all the time. It gives us a really strong picture for sure, but it's not always the whole movie. All right, let's shift gears and look at our next blueprint. This one builds a completely different kind of knowledge. Here, the focus totally moves away from explaining why something happened and instead zeroes in on predicting what's going to happen next and figuring out who we're talking about. And this right here really nails that fundamental shift. With causal modeling, you're kind of like a detective, trying to piece together the clues of cause and effect. But with these predictive and segmentation models, now you're a strategist. You're trying to forecast an outcome, like which companies are at risk of going bankrupt, or you're trying to identify distinct groups, like different kinds of wine drinkers. And to pull this off, the toolkit gets way bigger. Researchers start bringing in all these cool methods from the world of machine learning. For predicting things, they'll use techniques like random forest, which, and this is cool, is basically like a big committee of decision trees that all vote on the final answer. And for finding groups, they use clustering algorithms that can automatically spot hidden patterns in the data that a person might totally miss. And you can really see the practical power of this approach in these studies. For example, researchers were able to split wine festival goers into elite and informal groups. Super useful for marketing, right? Or they could identify curious versus ritualistic wine consumers. Then in a totally different area, another study found that machine learning models were way better at predicting which companies might go bankrupt than the older statistical methods. It's all about creating these direct, actionable insights. Okay, our final blueprint is, well, it's a completely different beast. It's a radical departure from the first two. Instead of researchers creating data with surveys, this approach analyzes data that's already floating around out there, all the stuff created by regular people just living their digital lives. Yeah, this quote from one of the papers we looked at just says it all. The big idea here is to tap into that raw, unfiltered, authentic voice of the consumer. We're talking online reviews, social media posts, you name it. But how in the world do you make sense of thousands of messy, unstructured online reviews? Well, this is where researchers pull out the big guns. Sophisticated text mining tools like latent semantic analysis, or LSA. It's an algorithm that can basically read through all that text and figure out the hidden themes and topics that people are actually talking about without being asked. And as you can see, the workflow here is totally different. It starts by scraping data that's already public. In one study, it was hundreds of Google Maps reviews for a famous religious site. Then there's a huge data cleaning step to get the text ready. Only then can a tool like LSA find the main topics. And finally, you use clustering to group the reviewers themselves based on what they wrote about.
It's not about testing a theory. It's a process of pure discovery.
And the results are just fascinating. By analyzing what people chose to write about on their own, the researchers found three totally distinct types of tourists. You had the heritage explorers, who were all about the facts, then the aesthetes, who focused on beauty and art, and the biggest group, the self-transcendence seekers, who were there for spiritual connection. And that's the magic of it, right? These are the kind of nuanced, authentic insights you'd probably never find if you just used a pre-written survey.
All right, so let's pull back for a second and look at all three of these blueprints side by side. It's time to synthesize what we've learned and get that big picture view of how modern research really gets done. Okay, when you lay it all out like this, you can really see the whole landscape. It's like a spectrum of different research philosophies. On one end, you've got the super structured, theory-testing power of causal modeling that relies on surveys. In the middle, you have the more practical, action-focused world of predictive and segmentation models. And then, all the way on the other end, you have the exploratory, discovery-driven analysis of user-generated content. Every single blueprint has its own purpose, its own unique set of tools, its own incredible strengths, and, of course, its own unique challenges. You know, this variety of methods isn't just some dry academic exercise. It's a direct reflection of the absolute explosion in the kinds of data that are available to us now. It really shows there's no single best way to build knowledge anymore. The blueprint you choose has to fit the question you're asking. And that leaves us with a really critical question. As data keeps getting bigger and messier, which of these blueprints will be the ones that build the future of research?